the stands of wonder, heartbreak, and hope also called us to certain actions in the world. There were the imperatives that I think Thomas Traeger brought most clearly to our attention. Taking a stand of wonder towards God's world asks us to reflect on it. Being heartbroken in God's world requires of us to rage, as I said last night, to rage against the evil done by wicked people out there in a sort of an imprecatory way like we find in Psalm 137. Raging, yes, at God because of our sense of abandonment by Him in the worst moments of our lives, as we find in Psalm 88. And rage against the evil that we ourselves birth and generate in our own hearts, as we find in Psalm 51, when we recognize that it is not just a torturer or someone who plants a landmine who is culpable in this world for the generation of evil, but we ourselves. That when we watch Tony Soprano plotting the demise of an opponent, it is just a more intensified version of our own plotting in our office politics and in our marital politics and in the ways in which we are in the world. So we learned in 1995 as a group of youngish adults to reflect and to rage and to rejoice, and to find the appropriate place for our rage within the context of reflection and rejoicing. And what we also learned was that these stances towards the world and these imperatives towards certain kinds of action in the world arose out of a dialogue with God. God acts, and that primary action by God is what calls our reaction. We respond to God. And so wonder, heartbreak, and hope are subjectively responding to God's actions, His greater acts, the Magnalia Dei of creation, judgment, and redemption. And so out of this very subjective encounter with the Psalms that my friends and I had in 1995, we were reminded of the backdrop of the grand narrative of the Scriptures. And we were able to locate ourselves within this bigger story. Now, if 1995 had not happened, and if my cynical and broken friends and I had not learned to pray alongside and out of the context of the Psalms, if we did not become aware of this grand narrative of the Bible story of God's acts as the framework for our lives, I have little doubt that 96 and 97 would have been far more destructive for me, destructive as it was, because against the backdrop of wonder, I was able to process my rage. The evil that I encountered in the context of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was something that I could not make sense of, but at least locate against the backdrop of a recognition of the goodness of God's creation. So today what I'm trying to talk about is how our experience of goodness and the goodness of creation frames our heartbreak, so that our heartbreak is embedded in a sense of wonder and therefore finds itself to have limits, so that we are not, for all of our lives, overwhelmed by heartbreak. I do think there are days and weeks and months and years when we are overwhelmed by heartbreak. As I confessed last night, for 2 years I prayed little else than Psalm 137. I don't recommend that. It's just the reality of my life. But that 2-year stretch of praying Psalm 137 is embedded in a lifetime of praying this Psalter. It would have been even better if I was a Benedictine and I prayed through the Psalter with greater velocity, if you will. So the goodness of God's creation. Neil Plantinga, the president of Calvin Seminary, I believe, wrote one of my favorite books on sin, if one's allowed to have favorite books on sin. Not the way it's supposed to be is what it's called. And here's a little phrase from it. The webbing together of God, humans, and all creation in justice, fulfillment, and delight is what the Hebrew prophets call shalom. We call it peace, but it means far more than mere peace of mind or a ceasefire between enemies. In the Bible, shalom means universal flourishing, wholeness, and delight. A rich state of affairs in which natural needs are satisfied and natural gifts fruitfully employed. A state of affairs that inspires joyful wonder. Shalom is the way things ought to be. And I think it's against the backdrop of our understanding of shalom, of the goodness of God's creation, that we're able to recognize sin for what it is. Oops. Yeah. So Neil Plantinga suggests that sin is culpable shalom breaking. And he suggests that when we sin, we pervert, adulterate, and destroy good things. We create matrices and atmospheres of moral evil and bequeath them to our descendants. By habitual practice, we let loose a great rolling momentum of moral and spiritual evil across generations. By doing such things, we involve ourselves deeply in what theologians call corruption. I really want to get back to the goodness bit, but I think that there's, at least for me, something really true in this notion that our evil, our breaking of shalom, our rupturing of the web of delight that God spun in His creation, is something that we bequeath to generations. As I said to you last night, I have wonderful parents who lived their lives with the best of intentions and who bequeathed, through the work they did with those good intentions, a country to my generation in which a man sitting on a deacon's bench in a church could, in his day job, wrap open electrical cord around the testicles of someone who on the preceding Sunday sat on the church benches of the same denomination, as I heard in testimony in camera in the commission. I assure you that that legacy is not something that my parents intended. Yes, they were racists, but they were well-intentioned and would have been horrified to know that in their name, these particular acts were committed. And yet these matrices and atmospheres of evil is something in which they share and in which I share. But we're only able to recognize the breaches of shalom, the rupturing of the web of goodness, when we know goodness. And so I would suggest to you that we are able to locate evil in the world. Not make sense of it, but locate it, because we know good, and we know good because of our mothers.